I think we just want to pull them in. Because the web, like when you go look at the website, you'll know why I'm saying that. Because it's a vast website. So we would want to pull stuff in specifically that we wanted.
Maybe we really have to, I mean, I'm being serious, decap them as not referred to it in a patented way, but that we're trying to achieve dark sky principles, and then we bring in the ones we want, but we certainly, we didn't do that here, we didn't say that we had to.
Yeah, I like that dark sky principles. I think that's a good way to couch that. She said dark sky principles. Yeah.
Okay, so let's make sure, I just think it's a very evocative word.
You want to convene the meeting?
Yes, I do. I can't believe
We're having a
how
little
few
side meeting.
people are here.
I know.
That's why I was thinking it wasn't 9.
Everybody's just worn out.
Everybody.
Actually, a short planning commission. There's 30 last night. It was good.
Okay. All right. Well, we have us, the 5 of us, and 2 guests. So
Hi,
that's
everyone.
My chopped liver.
You go without saying, Brandon. You're like a fixture of the room. Yeah, seriously. Oh, we do. Okay, good. Okay, so who do we have in Zoom? Hello, everybody. So we've got 6 people, 7 people in Zoom. Thanks for joining. Okay, do we have any new faces? It's very hard for me to see that, at least on the corner. Okay.
Hi, everyone. It's Stephen.
Hi, thanks for coming. Welcome. Okay, but we had so many people last time. I'm surprised. All right,
We got kind of a light agenda, so that's probably okay.
yeah. So we're all here. Roll call is, I see all 5 of the committee members. Public comments on non-agenda items. Does anyone? Yes, David, go ahead. Oh, sorry. You got the mic issue.
Thank you. There was a discussion last time that I've been ruminating on, and I just wanted to address from my perspective. As a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and sometimes why, inclusivity and diversity are very important to me, and I'm very grateful that these are things that we're including in a lot of different aspects of our lives. And I have friends in the neighborhood or in town that actually 3 sets of friends that have modern homes, and I care about them deeply, and I care about how they feel in this whole process about being respected and appreciated. And we were talking last week about this concept of 75-25% liking or disliking a certain type of design. And so I started to think to myself, why in what scenario is it appropriate for the majority to rule over the minority? Or should it always just be, 25% of what's going on is that way or the other way? And I came up with this. It says, when the majority's definable rights are infringed upon by the minority's objective wishes, majority should rule. So then I ask, okay, well, is the majority being infringed upon? There is an objective thing about harmony. Should the neighborhoods be harmonious? Should the city be harmonious? In that way, is it better for tourism? Is it better for real estate? Well, there's actually a good example in regards to real estate. Our neighborhood has several modern homes, and we understand that and we respect that, but most of the people don't like them, and they don't want them to be near them. They say it's okay to have modern homes, but not near me. And so that's the kind of things they say. And when people want to buy a traditional home or a quaint home or something like that, they don't want a modern home, an industrial, a commercial type of structure next door. So it damages their resale situation. Certain non-traditional homes don't do that, so that's acknowledged. But so where am I going with this? I would suggest that we consider putting something in the design guidelines about harmony, in the neighborhoods. Something along those lines. I know that's subjective, but you might consider that. And that we might consider using words like industrial and commercial style of design or whatever in residential neighborhoods, in R1 neighborhoods, discouraging that. The other thing that I just wanted to bring up real quick is this situation of not wanting an HOA. That's something I've heard a lot from people who don't like the idea of discouraging certain styles. And, but, you know, really, city council is like a giant HOA, you know, and we do already put in place and have in the past put in place talking about styles that were appropriate and not appropriate. And so we are already doing that job and have been doing it for a long time. So continuing that would be appropriate. I hope everybody will consider that. Thank you.
So again, we're still on the, thank you, David, on the public comments on non-agenda items. It's true this is really non-agenda in the sense that we went through it. Hold on one second. I just want to, before we get to the steering committee, I just want to keep it open to the public, if you don't mind. Don, can you hold your comment for 1 second?
I have a public thing, not mine.
Okay, hold on. All right, here we go.
I had a call from Carolyn Walker Davis, who wasn't able to join us either way in person or on Zoom, and she asked me if I could express some concern she had, and then I was going to do that, and then she sent me a note, basically those comments, which I will read. I've attached quick snapshots I took on my morning walk yesterday to illustrate the importance of allowing and encouraging more building materials for fences and gates. The currently sanctioned grape stakes and or wood fencing and gates. There you go. Thank you. Seem to be taking over and stifling creativity, although perfectly appropriate for some sites. In recent years, many new, shiny, solid, quote, massive grape stake fences have appeared in strange places. She's talking about ones that have no spacing, that are just solid grape stakes, having no reference to the newly designed building. Stone and ironwork, masonry, and low stucco, well-designed walls, fences, gates should be allowed and encouraged if appropriate to the design of the building. Of the attached photos taken as an afterthought on the walk, the one that looks the worst is the wood fence, currently encouraged by the guidelines. A bit of stone out front would have made a much more cohesively designed building site composition. She goes on to talk about Francis Whitaker's comments, who did the wonderful iron gates. I'll pass around these photos so you'll see what she's talking about. And that's her comments.
So let me reiterate. Okay. So to just, for people who might not have heard, we have a public comment from somebody who couldn't be here today, Carolyn Walker Davis. Who's talking about the problem with bad wood fences, and that if we encourage wood fences sort of exclusively and they turn out bad, then they're worse than something that might have more diverse materials. And I guess this is the example here. It must be in her mind, right? So this is a solid wood fence. That's what she's saying? So she's on the bottom here. She's saying that is not as open and appropriate as something that would be more solid. I mean, different material, but more open. So it's more porous. So she's advocating for porosity and not so much strictness on materials if it means that we don't have porosity. It sounds like. Should pass that around. Okay. Thank you for bringing that to us, Don. Any other public comments on items not on today's topic list?
Sorry, I'm late and can't stay too long. I just had sort of a general thought, is that I'm trying to find some peace in our struggle here, in our conflict between what I think is primarily the architectural profession and the people of Carmel. And that now that I see it, it is largely this, in this kind of a context. Obviously, there are people in Carmel who want modern, understood. We've talked about that. The percentage is not very high. Is that what, by the way, you guys have spent a lot of time studying architectural psychology. I did a 3-part seminar that was given at Sonoma State University on the psychology of architecture. When a people has a feeling about their place that they identify with, because of their history, because they were born there, because of where they came from, because of and they have a sense of what works and does not work in their city. You do not let the architects override that and say, you're wrong and we're right. You listen to the people, and now what the architects do is say, let's work with the residents. What are the residents? They don't want modern style in Carmel. Okay, we got it. Let's just go there and let's be done with it and let's serve them. We'll do our other work in modern, which will get us our reputation and so on elsewhere. You know, we don't have to do that in Carmel. And serve the people. Architecture to me is a profession of service. So I just wanted to say that and try and make it more understandable that we're not trying to create a fight, or we're not hating architects or anything like that. We're just saying, can we please acknowledge the will of the residents, like that sign up there says. And that's all for now.
Is it, related to what Neil said? I'm going to bring it back to the committee if we can finish is that okay? I just want to make sure we've got all the public comment out. Is there anything on any other topic that's not? Oh, is anybody in the Zoom room on this issue? I don't see anybody. Anyone on the public that has something unrelated to the style but also not on the topic list? Okay. All right. So let's close that public comment part, and now bringing it back to the committee. Sounds like you want to.
No, you want to go to David first?
David already. Oh, did you have your hand up again?
No. Are you done?
Yes, I'm finished. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say something related to what Neil was saying. I found it very interesting. I was looking for something on the internet relative to the city. And so I looked at city promotion. It's very interesting what they have. They have all the storybook things. That's what the city uses to promote us. And so I just bring that up, that it's a little bit amazing when we spend so much time talking about style to see how our city projects itself anyway to tourism. So I say that. And I think that Carolyn Walker Davis's issue is pretty much resolved by us, because we say we want to be able to look through fences and be able to see the landscaping and the open space, et cetera. So I think that that we got her message loud and clear some months ago, and we all support that. So I hope that you'll let her know, Don, if she's not on Zoom land, I can't see, but let her know that that we acknowledge what she's saying.
I'm sure she'll tune in.
Okay, good.
Later.
Anybody else?
Well, I'm a little confused about when we can talk about unrelated issues.
Can I, yeah. So I'm just, I wanted to make sure the public had all their comments out so we can move to the next agenda item. So now we're on announcements for the steering committee and the staff. Do you have any announcements, Brandon? Okay. So do you have something you want to say?
It's not an announcement, so it belongs into the comments that are not related on the agenda. I just wanted to react to a couple things from the last meeting. Well, first of all, David, I want to really thank you for your comment, because going home from that meeting last week, I was deeply disturbed about the comments. I think that this comment that the people that are others should live somewhere else, I find that is how every society gets radicalized, and it's used for a lot of things. It's not only, next thing the Jews and the blacks don't belong here either, because they really don't fit into our picture, and that's exactly what's used for not doing inclusionary housing, because the Mexicans can live in Seaside. Why would we have to build for them anything in Carmel? And I mean, this is a really awful road, slippery road that we go, this complete intolerance, and I think that's where we need to start. And I find that a deeply, deeply disturbing attitude, and something like architecture that's so harmless, and it's people who live in these houses, who like to live in these houses, has nothing to do with architects. To tell them, like David DiGirolamo or other people that live in these houses that have participated here, to tell them they should leave town. I mean, that's essentially what was said, right? That the people who want modern things should live somewhere else. And that's what I found deeply disturbing. I heard it again today. That was one of the comments. Then I also wanted to react to the landscape ordinance. Thanks for asking about that last week. The city of Seaside has made design a priority and has the funds to hire Jeannie Gang. We are one of the wealthiest communities in California, and we cannot afford to hire the best, even if they live within city limits. I think that's really disappointing. Why does the city of Carmel keep not hiring the best and the brightest for the segment of work that we're looking for? And last not least, because reinforcement has come up so much, I was wondering why that fence on Junipero and 8th is still on public property. It actually had fallen down during the storms, and that I drove by a couple days ago, and here it is back up on public property. I don't know why that's not enforced. Why is that fence still there? So that was my
That was near and dear to my
comments.
that gift to me personally. So I've spent 10 frickin' years trying to get that off our property, our public property, my land. So thank you for that. Okay, so I think that we need to get to the discussion items, if we could. You've said you have no announcements, Brandon?
Nope.
Okay. So this is number 5, and again, I appreciate everybody's comments. I don't know if it's resolvable, this thing we're talking about, but I think, it's certainly a fascinating conversation. I don't want to, as the facilitator of the larger conversation, we really could have days, we could have a whole conference about this, I honestly think, and I don't really think we can, do it every time. So I don't know what else to say as a facilitator of moving this work along, but I do appreciate all the comments, and I think they're serious and they're important. But if you don't mind, let's take up where we left off. I'm just going to check, looking over at the Zoom room. I don't see anything there. We were going from the bottom up for some reason, and we had gotten to the Muni guideline question, but that is a bigger issue still.
Yeah, I think it's different.
Okay, different meeting. So we can skip over the gap and go up one to compounds, street rhythm preservation techniques. Or we don't have to handle these in exactly this order, but has everybody got their list handy? They can see what we're talking about. Did we touch on this? Oh, I guess we started to touch on this, didn't we?
Why did you skip over public spaces?
Oh, no, just because Brandon had hoped that we could go through the entire thing, but we can like, it would take longer, but why not, if you have a comment on it that's, yeah, no, just that it deserves its own pass-through like we did for the other ones.
Yeah, the conversation was possibly taking the municipal version and doing the same treatment we did with the commercial residential as like its own conversation. But I think it would be fruitful possibly to have just a high-level conversation about it.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, my sense is from the community and from this group that I have not heard a single person be opposed to the idea of a third volume and separating out these public issues. I mean, this is not a huge group here, but I think I'm just looking around to see if I'm getting any protests about that. I think folks like the idea. We did have this plan to go through it in a more thorough way, separately. I did also want to, I don't have yet, and maybe this would be an update that, as secretary I could do prior to our doing the full through, which is there's only one document that's been integrated into the commercial and residential so far in this draft of the public, which is these, curb designs, and there is a thing about ADA ramps, and this is from one city document. So we did want to do some kind of check to determine whether there are other design-related documents floating around in the departments, and just make sure that we coalesce them in one document. That's the sort of promise of this, is that we all can know where to find all that stuff. And also just to elevate it in the community conversation so that the various boards are aware that, this is something that they also need to be focused on when projects come up. So I still don't know if we have that all. Brandon, do you mind commenting on that? And just, I don't know what your suspicions are about wayward documents.
I know they all exist. Yeah, and I think we have most of them pulled together from one of our previous meetings. We did pull together a pile of documents, so I can give it before we have the next meeting to talk about it on its own. I can make sure we pull those together, and we can have those as like a go out like a week ahead of time, pre-materials for everyone to look at.
Cool.
It might be useful if maybe the committee pulls up street standards, public way standards from other communities, and see if the documents we have or the ones that are proposed are void of other issues that should be addressed.
Yeah. I feel a homework assignment coming on to you, Doug. Okay, thank you. Oh, good, thank you. Okay. So we did think we would just not ignore the uppermost G, the potential third, but just, again, save that for when we have a little more information. So I thought we did start to talk, actually last time when the bell rang, about compounds and street rhythm preservation techniques. And Brandon was explaining to us things about how the codes currently encourage some lot merging, and we're trying to at least get to neutral or better on that principle. And that also if you apply to demolish, you can't get approved to demolish a house unless you have an approval to build a house back. Which is what we have right now. Is that's where you want to go. We don't have it quite that.
Exists right now.
I thought you explained that it was you had to have some kind of development plan, but it didn't have to be for a replacement building. Like it could be a pool or a tennis court or a park.
No, that was where I started. And then I remember I did the clarification because I was texting with my staff. They were looking it up for me at the time. So yeah, it is for sure. You have to have a replacement home for the site. Yeah, the issue with the pool one was that they had merged the lot.
Right. Okay.
So there's still a single family dwelling on that, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for reminding me. I remember there was that update. And there's, so I think then we went into a conversation about, how to avoid the sort of cookie cutter, the tendency to say, oh, if I have several lots, maybe I'll just do them all at once and with the same builder and the same architect, and it'll just look like a little spec house development, which we have a few of those around. So is there anything else on this topic before we move to up the list? Does anyone have any comments on the compounding and what we discussed last time? Or people are satisfied with where we got on that? Okay. The possibility of an extent of enclosure. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Could you summarize what your understanding is?
Yes, I'll try. My understanding is that some of the things we're afraid of, which could be the radical changing of the rhythm of our 40-foot lots, are possible now because Brandon would like to address the lot merging, the incentives to merge lots that we currently have at the regulatory level. That's not in our purview, but it seems like it's coming along to the point where we are going to not have that encouragement in the regulations. And if that's the case, then the idea that you could design a whole compound that undermines the sort of rhythm of the street would be less possible. But you could still own multiple lots on a nobody can stop. It's a free country. Nobody can stop you from that. So then we were talking about making sure that we have in the next, round, other language to try out that would discourage cookie cutter spec type developments, because that is a temptation. Does that make sense? And then.
So I have a hypothetical, Brandon, and a question. Hypothetical is, what happens if a house burns down?
If a house burns down, then you can apply to rebuild it. I mean, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, if you have two adjoining, hypothetical, if you have two adjoining houses or three houses, and consecutive, right, and you'd like to do a compound, but you don't want to rebuild the houses. What if there's a fire? There's no plan on file. There's no demolition that's been permitted. What's the city's response to that? Or there's never an improvement made to the property.
Well, I think, we went down this rabbit hole a little bit last time too. I mean, it's the same response as, so let's take the scenario of someone comes in for a plan to demolish a house and rebuild it. They get the house approved for rebuilding through the planning commission. They pull building permits, they demo the house, and then they just decide never to build a house. That's totally their right to do as a property owner. It's the same thing here. If a house burns down and they choose not to rebuild a house, we can't force someone to build a house back on their property.
Could they put a tennis court there? Or?
No, it's still a residential. So the question was, could they build a tennis court there? And the answer is no. If it's a residentially zoned lot, that's not a use that you can have there.
So then let's imagine there is a corner property at Unipro and 8th. And the owner gets approval for two houses, but only builds one. Don't we potentially have that problem which exists today at that site?
I'm still not sure I understand, because there was just a house that was approved there at the planning commission.
Original approvals were given. Both houses were to be built simultaneously.
But it's not. You can't force someone to build a house. There's no legal requirement that forces someone to build a house. Is that? I mean, that's what you're asking, right? Does the city have a way to force somebody to build a house on a property? And the answer is no.
Conditional use permit for those properties, and they were built simultaneously.
The use permit allows someone to build a house. It doesn't require them to build a house.
Right. But the city went ahead, this is way before all of our time.
Yeah.
The city went ahead and let one house be constructed and not the other house. So it seems like, to me, we ought to have some sort of safeguard so we don't have that situation. And it's just one lot in that situation, but what about multiple lots?
I know so much about this project that we're talking about, and we probably shouldn't spend too much time on it, but that was an enforcement problem. There is no question. That permit was to build an attached to, it's a duplex. And for some reason, it would have been detectable at the very first moment that the shovel hit the ground that this was only going to be half the project. And that's why we've been talking about it for decades since, because it was not done the way it was permitted. It was permitted as a duplex. So I don't know how it gets addressed.
I guess, I mean, probably because I wasn't here at the time, but I still don't fully see the problem, because it's two separate pieces of property. Yes, they're under the same ownership, but they have an entitlement to build a property with a house and a property with a development, I mean, were they supposed to be connected to each other?
They was approved as one building.
Across two, and the lots were supposed to be merged?
It's a commercial property, it had a party wall. It said this permit is only valid if it's built at the same time with the two halves of the building.
I'd have to look at it. I mean, I haven't looked at that language, but, yeah, I mean, yeah, Marianne, I feel like we're trying to solve for the 1% situation here, honestly, but.
Let's just start with the small things that are doable. Have your public works department remove that fence, and then we worry about the building later. That would be one small step towards a good result.
It is defying logic that we are where we are on that corner. That is for sure. Okay.
It's going to hearing next month at City Council.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
He's saying that with a light tone, so it makes me think that he's optimistic, but I don't know.
I don't place bets. I don't. If I had a crystal ball that told me how hearings would happen, I would not work here anymore. I'd make $1 million as a consultant.
Okay, so, yes, I mean, I don't know what to do about that one. But the other thought we had about compounds and stuff is that the reason there's a G next to this one is that there are ways in the design guidelines space to discourage people from thinking they can make a large multi-lot statement. So we raised two issues last time. One was, what if people take a big lot and make lots of small houses that are specky, and that's scary. And then we had the opposite concern as well. What if somebody takes a bunch of small houses that are cute and wonderful and then makes some big statement across an entire block or half a block or so? And that part is probably addressable at the guideline level. So we don't have language in there now for that, but we could test some language for the next round that basically says, you don't get to change the rules about following the design guidelines just because you own multiple lots. So that's something that we don't address yet.
But I don't think we have to say that, because the rules for property lines and setbacks and so are for each individual lot. So if there are no more lot mergers, it's automatically baked in. I don't think we have to address that separately, because each lot will have to keep its lot coverage, its property line. So you can only build a house on each lot. And if you build one for yourself and one for your children and you have a walk in between, that's perfectly fine, right? So. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and have maybe one big house and a small house, and that might actually be nice for the street if not each lot is maximized, And actually, when somebody owns multiple lots, they would be much more likely not to maximize each lot. So if they're using it as a family compound, so.
So that's a good, we're hanging our hopes on the change of the regulation. So, I think you're right that if it does change, maybe we don't need to work on it from a guideline. So maybe we just have to figure out the timing of that.
Excuse me, this is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Hopefully you
Go
can hear
ahead,
me.
please.
Hopefully this doesn't take you off rail. If it does, go ahead and shelve it. But from the RENA-related processes and the housing element, part of what they care about a whole lot is not decreasing housing unit count. And I don't know how that's reinforced. Maybe Brandon can offer a comment if it fits. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy, for bringing it up. You want to respond?
I think what Nancy's alluding to is one of the main reasons we want to remove that incentive for merging lots, is because every time you merge two lots together, you've taken the possibility of building two houses and turned it into building one house. Yeah. So removing that language from our code is going to be supported, at the state level. It's something we can put in our housing element update saying, look, this is a step we're taking to make us a more viable housing producing city. So it seems like for me, it seems like an obvious win in many facets, from the design perspective and also from the housing production perspective.
What about the scheduling of that What about the scheduling of that maneuver? When do you see that coming, Brandon?
It's either going to be alongside of the zoning code updates that are part of the design traditions, or the housing element update, both of which are, on the housing element update needs to be across the finish line January this year, January next year. So relatively soon. I mean, we're on a similar track now for the design guidelines. So within the next, 8 months or so, I would say.
Okay, thank you for that. Any closing thoughts on this compounding matter? Everybody had their thoughts? I think it's very productive. This is another thing, the next one up that came up obviously during our discussions, the possibility of an extent of enclosure setbacks from the property line. Now this relates to what was read from Carolyn Walker Davis. There's an idea here. We can reject it out of hand. We can consider it, chew it over. We can do a number of things. But we raise the issue of whether certain types of enclosures, as they get more opaque, might be asked to be farther back from the street. So remember, the general principle is the continuity of the forest, the porosity, as we said earlier, of any built structure. So we've already set it up so we encourage openness in the residential guideline. Then we say, if you need some structure there, how about some shrubs? Try that first. Then we say, if you still aren't, go to an open fence. So we're doing a sort of gradual sort of escalation of enclosure. The question here is really building on that if we want to. It's an option where we say, as you get more closed, less porous, maybe you don't hold the line right at that property line. You let the forest go further back into lot. If you're very interested in having something opaque or taller, come back from the property line. That was just something that was raised. It's a new idea, so we need to, obviously take some time on it and see if we want to bag it, explore it, whatever. Here's Don.
I'm a little hazy on what kind of enclosures we're talking about. I can't visualize that. What are we talking about?
This is just the same kind of fences and wall discussion, but as we've tried to clarify in this new version, we are making clear that the values of the town is toward openness and continuity of the forest. What do you need, Marianne? Those have got passed around. Oh, Don still has it.
So this isn't enclosures in the sense of structure. This is an enclosure in the sense of like when you're enclosing the property.
So for example, I was at I was snooping at a house that's for sale on Taurus, the very big house, and it has a tall adobe wall around a very formal fountain and courtyard. You cannot see that wall from the street. It's integrated into the house. So it's a very opaque, private structure, but it's very far from, so the forest looks continuous through the property. But this, what we still have now is basically no matter what kind of fence or wall or enclosure you put, it is permitted to be right on that public-private line. Do we want to have or test the idea of, well, if you have an open type of fence or hedge, then yes, go ahead and put it on the front property line. But if you start to want something more tall or more opaque, then we would like you to bring it closer to the house. Maybe it's a courtyard that's close to the front door. Maybe it's something that encloses a private garden for one room, this kind of thing. It's just an idea that came up during the larger discussion that is part of that gradation from the street to the home. Do we want to consider it? Do we want to consider saying, if you're going to do a super solid or above a certain height, then please bring it back X number of feet or closer to the building or whatever. This is just really more of the same discussion about the continuity of the forest. Maybe people feel that's too imposing. Maybe they feel it's great. I don't know. That just came up, so I have it on the list.
So for context, we currently regulate height at the front. So it's a 4-foot fence at the front line until you get 15 feet back, and then you can have a taller fence. So that is currently, we have nothing in our code right now other than what it says to starting with no fence, moving to open fence. So we do talk about that in the current guidelines, but we don't have anything in there right now that talks about as your fence or whatever you're using to enclose the site gets less opaque, then it has to move back onto the site. So I think that's what you're saying, like, or more opaque, thank you. Yeah.
Right, it's just another tool. Neil, go ahead, tell us your thoughts.
I'm intrigued by this, a little concerned about the complexity of enforcing it, but you know what? I like it because it gives precedence to the forest, and that is really important to us. So I understand it may be a little bit of a complicated thing, but I like that. I like that, you know, when you see a property and all of a sudden you've got these really visible things forward on the site, and it also diminishes the view of the house as well. So you're also letting the house be the dominant. I kind of like it. I just don't know how we could legislate it.
So there's a check in the pro column. If it seems too complex, it may or may not be complex. I don't know. We haven't really gotten into it yet. This is more just we're conceptually testing it. Is it worth getting into? Is it worth talking about? And it's kind of what Brandon says is already there, but maybe more of this. In other words, you get some more height if you're further from the road. That's already part of the regulations. Go ahead, Carol.
I'm thinking of some of the houses that exist presently that have courtyards and so forth, especially the Spanish style, that work well. Maybe we could word it in a way, consideration for more opaque or taller walls, period.
This is Nancy again.
Yes,
I don't
Nancy,
know
go ahead.
if we want to throw this into the mix or not, but the homes that align major thoroughfares, should they be allowed more consideration for sound barriers in whatever form? I don't know that I'm a proponent of it, but I just wanted to throw that out.
I'm glad you brought that up. I have thought about that many times. It's crossed my mind. I've never brought it up in this forum, but just personally, when you're driving down Carpenter and you see, we've made it very clear that we're not too keen here on estate gates or anything like that, but certainly there could be moments in town that really are special conditions. If you're on a main drag and there's a lot of traffic or stop signs or something, or a bus route, then maybe we have to think about that. I do think it's worth raising. Thank you, Nancy. Go ahead. I see a comment from Melanie.
I would be concerned. I mean, I understand the noise factor and all of that, but do we want things to start looking walled off on our major thoroughfares? I mean, on Carpenter, there's there are very few houses except in certain blocks that have very high fences. And, it's not pleasing at all to go by them. And I think that we still have to be sensitive, especially because we travel those routes all the time. So, it creates a visual barrier. It sends a message to visitors, to all of us that, we can't see any house. We can't barely sometimes see a roof. And just kind of when you're driving Carpenter or Junipero or San Carlos, think about that now and see what you really want to do. Because like on San Antonio, there are certain parts of San Antonio that really appear walled off. I mean, that's one thing that really irritates me when I really don't like San Antonio to drive on, because I really don't like what's being allowed has been allowed in the past. It's very, very walled off in some areas. And it's not a welcoming, it's not a pleasing. You don't see all the vegetation. You just get an idea, well, these people are rich, and so they just don't want to be, bothered by anybody who's on the street. They just don't want to relate to the street. So I don't know. I throw that out just for thought, because I'm really opposed to high fences and walling off of the community.
I like this is like the Socratic method, back and forth. Go ahead.
I think currently we have the 15-foot setback for the house, right, for a structure. So normally if there wouldn't be any fence at all, you have the wall, basically the wall at 15 feet. If right now we could have a 4-foot fence at the property line or a wall at the property line, then maybe rather than having the wall, the house wall at 15 feet, if you give somebody a 10-foot area that they could have walled in front of a as an entry courtyard or in front of a room, because you're right on a busy street. And I think it's not only Carpenter, it's also scenic in San Antonio. I mean, there are just so many people, and they always have cars parked right outside their window, basically, sometimes big ones. If you do that with a setback of like 5 feet, for example, it would give the inhabitants of these houses some privacy, and the 5 feet would allow for really nice planting. So then when you go up and down a street, you don't have that walled off right at the street level, but you would have the landscape ordinance would then take care of planting. And it's actually maybe even nicer because you then have control over planting that's almost part of the public space. And the people who live there also get what they want, so that might be a good compromise.
Hi, this is Stephen online.
Go ahead, Stephen.
So a couple of thoughts. One is, I think, I'm just building on Marianne's comments. You could simply have a guiding line from the 4-foot to the 15-foot line, so basically a diagonal line, and then if the property owner, or the design sits within that diagonal line, that would be sort of a mechanical way to do it. And then I also think that, a lot of these conversations that we've been having, it feels like it goes back to this concept that there's a set of pre-approved concepts, like a 4-foot property line fence with a lot of porosity. And then if you want to go into this diagonal line, it becomes a review process. So it's not by right, but it has to be reviewed. And then there's a built-in incentive to, stick to the concept. But if you feel really strongly that you want to do this, then it goes to staff for review. That, I don't know if that becomes too complicated for staff, but it's just a built-in way to say to people that we're open to creative ideas, but it has to be within this rule. And you have to go through this process, which is a complication that some people may not want to do.
Well, I thank you for that. I personally like the idea of having, in a way, a preferred or pre-approved. Brandon doesn't like that word, but preferred. Kind of, you're probably going to do very well if you just do this minimal. But if you want to, I like the idea of increasing review for things that are exceptions. I want to make clear that, and at least my understanding of what we're discussing, is that some of the stuff we have now in town would not be permitted under this diagonal, for example. I like the idea of the diagonal too, it's very graphic. But so, and that's not meant to say that people need to tear anything down, or that if it's historic or beautiful or ancient or lovely that it needs to be dealt with. But it would mean that it's in addition to the idea that we prefer 0 things on the lot line. And then we go to plantings. And then we go to fences. And then as you add I like this style, as you add the opacity, you need to go back. So some walls that are there now would not be, because they're on the property line and they are opaque, that would no longer be a possibility. So I'm looking around to make sure that people understand what I think we're discussing. And that seems like okay. People like that. Yeah, okay. Okay. All right, this is interesting. Okay, this is this is new terrain we get to sometimes. Okay, so we're...
In this scenario then, in this scenario, just make sure I understand, a 4-foot wall, solid wall, at the front property line would not be allowed?
Right.
Okay. Is that, because because the whole gate.
But he's grandfathered.
Okay. I know, well, that's why I'm looking over here, because I saw David shaking his head yes, but we had the conversation about fences and gates and walls, and I thought that we were. Yeah. It's okay, like, minds can change. I just want to make sure everyone understands. But in this scenario, a 4-foot wall, solid wall along the front property line would not be allowed.
You can imagine, like, let me see if I can just.
But that means no more solid walls
No, they're further back. They're farther back on the lot.
on the property.
So I'm gonna draw my diagonal, hold on. You want a question?
We have a very narrow lot line on our property, for example, and we're on the corner. And so the way that they did it on the front side, actually where the front door is on 12, there's, gosh, maybe 10-foot setback or something like that total. And I think right on the property line is a low wall. And so in that scenario that you were talking about, even the low wall or fence would not be allowed on the property line.
I think it all hangs on that idea of the diagonal. In other words, I think that's the right, easy way to think of it. I don't think there's anything complicated about that way of handling it. But you could start the diagonal up 2 feet. You could start the diagonal back 2 feet. It's possible that wherever that diagonal lands, yes, even a small curb might have to be back a foot, for example, from the property line. It's a sort of disincentive program, very much like we've tried to rephrase this to emphasize, please start with the idea of pine needles or whatever it is, or open dirt, then go to more and more opaque things. So yes, it would mean, but it could end up including exactly your wall. It just depends how you draw that line. The question is, do we want to even try to draw that line? And it looks like we want to try. It looks like we want to propose that and see what it looks like. And then we can talk about, oh, that's too strict. Let's raise the diagonal up a foot or whatever. So it's a geometry issue, really.
How are we going to write this out? I'm trying to write this thing out, what we're saying. And
Well, it is actually maximum building envelope. That's what it is, except for front yard structures. So I think we actually have a tool that is coming to us that could be, that could incorporate this other type of structure that's not just the building. Neil.
Good point. The planar, we're talking about building envelopes, and we use volumetrics now. And the other alternative is the planar metric system, which I prefer personally. But that begins to work very well now with this. It's in that same language. We're defining planes on the site. So again, it's a plus.
how do I describe it to somebody? Or how do I put it in, is it like a diagonal from the street?
From the property line.
From the, from the.
It hasn't landed anywhere yet.
Yeah, we
don't know
yet.
From wherever it is, you're looking up at a 45-degree angle.
Yeah, we have to figure out the angle, we have to figure out where it starts, we have to determine where it gets more opaque and stuff. So it's a diagram like the bulk plane, or we're calling it maximum building envelope. Yeah. We're basically saying, this is the thing we're entertaining, that we apply we're calling it maximum building envelope, but it's also the same as bulk plane. We're applying that diagrammatic approach to structures in the front yard also. That's what we're introducing as a concept. Now we may decide we may try it and it doesn't work. It's just like too cumbersome, or we hate it, and then we abandon it. But this is what we're saying, is this is why it's on the list. Should we entertain it? And the answer seems to be yes, we should entertain it. Okay, so good. I don't think we can get much my personal opinion is we can't get much farther around the table about that right now, but Doug, go ahead.
Who's going to draft some language?
That's a good question. I think we could throw it back to this, can we throw it back to this maximum building envelope, which we had tabled?
In the front, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's any suggestions though, because the nuance is, at the property line, does the bottom of the triangle start at 4 feet? So that a 4-foot solid wall would be allowed, or does it start at 2 feet? So you can have 2 feet of solid wall, and then 2 feet on top of that has to be open. Like, that's the conversation that needs to be had. So we can propose something. But if there's any thoughts on that, that's really like a key part of this, is where does the point of that triangle start? Start at grade? Does it start 1, 2, 3, 4 feet up? Because it can't be any higher than 4 feet, because nothing taller than 4 feet is allowed at the property line, so that's the max. But do we want it to start at the ground? So you have to, like, if you want something solid things have to be, you know, set back, yeah. So any guidance on that or thoughts on that would be appreciated.
I think it's possible that as a first stab, you might want to put the point of the diagonal on the ground as a first stab. It doesn't mean that we can't then have the discussion to raise it up a little bit, but that tests the principle of opacity back from the line. So that's just a thought, but I don't really care.
Yeah, I don't know that that makes sense, because that would mean you'd have to be 4 foot in before you have a 4-foot wall again, which you currently can have on the property line. So my suggestion would be to either start it at 4 feet, but say if it's at 4 feet at the property line, it cannot be solid. It has to be open, but you start that point at 4 feet where it is currently, so there's no changes to the current plan. But if you want to have a solid wall, then you have to go back, you know, so many feet from there, because I think the other one is really very restrictive.
Again, I'm not sure it matters that much where we start. We just have to start.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a really good idea. In our scenario, the wall is low, which is actually kind of nice because the street comes really close to the house, and it looks good. You know, it's nice. So if you can like keep it like, you know, a couple feet, you know, at the property line, I think that's generally nice. And there's a lot of old homes in Carmel that have low walls at the property line, and they look really charming, and people like them.
Okay, so good luck with that, Brandon. Okay, so we're moving up one tick to the existing and new single-family downtown versus mixed use. That's not a very felicitous phrase, but we have a pin in that because this is something I noticed when I was a planning commissioner, that folks were actually fairly caught off guard when we learned, and it's not, obviously there's original to the town single-family buildings that are in the commercial district. There's a smattering of them around. Most of them are more modest than what we build now, so they sort of have an R1 flavor to them. But what we've learned from the example that Mary Ann brought up earlier today about Unipro and 8th is that because of commercial zoning, somebody who would like to have a very large home, much bigger than you can build in the R1 district, can build lot line to lot line if they buy a commercial lot for their single family home. This is an incentive program, you could argue, as we move into a more, you know, wealth sort of division in this country, to actually remove commercial property from our downtown and make it residential in effect. This is something for me that just bothers me because, first of all, I don't think that was the intent of the founders who envisioned a mixed-use downtown that served the residents. I think it's a struggle to serve the residents, and if we incentivize the replacement of the service to the residents, we are undermining ourselves. I also think from an aesthetic standpoint, it's horrific, but it is currently allowed. And so this is not a guideline matter, but because it relates to design and what we look at and how and use and how it serves us, it is worth, I think, weighing in on whether we have an opinion about retaining or encouraging the mixed-use character of the downtown. David.
Thank you. I agree. I think it's very jarring to have, you know, a lot of commercial and then all of a sudden a house in the middle. And I don't think it's very nice for the people a lot of people don't want to buy a house in that scenario. But the idea of doing the mixed use is really great. So if we steer it towards the mixed use, then we get the more housing elements achieved as well.
Sure. Just the regulatory aspects and everything.
What about it?
I'm trying to ask Brandon if he could speak to us about where this is handled in the code and how it can be reformed if that's the will of the citizens, so that there is not so that if somebody wants a single family building, they go to the R1 district, basically.
Yeah, and I apologize. At our last meeting, I was all loaded up with this information because it's very difficult to do. It is possible to have a single family residence in the commercial district, but it is difficult to do. But basically, it would be in the, I think it's 1714, where it talks about the uses allowed in the commercial districts. And so it really would just be closing that down and saying, no, any residence has to have a commercial component on the first floor or something like that. So it'd be pretty simple language. And I think I do agree that based on all of the other languages in our code, like we talk about, second stories not being allowed for commercial use, and if you can't take away a commercial use and put back a residential use, things like that. So I think the intent is smattered all over the code, that this was the intent, was to not allow for a house to be built in the commercial district. So I don't think it'd be very difficult to do, to plug that hole. I mean, it's not something we really see often. Again, this is a 1 to 5% problem, but we can, if it's a hole we want to plug, we can certainly do it.
I'm scarred for life because I saw this 1% when I was on the Planning Commission, and it was very traumatizing for the community to go through the fight on the back-to-back properties that are across from the dance studio and the Scout House between Mission and San Carlos. Those were intended originally to be single-family McMansions, and the struggle on the Planning Commission was to get them to at least have a convertible lower unit that somebody could someday use for professional purposes, which will never happen because of the way the buildings are designed. But the regulations would not allow us to get those buildings to be mixed use. So it seems to me that if we can take care of that, I don't know, does anyone have any ideas whether this is at all? I have a C here that it's mostly a code issue, but is there a guideline issue here at all? I mean, you can say it must have the appearance of a commercial, and then let the regulations fill in the use part.
I think that word that I brought up earlier, harmony, I think if we use something like that, that may help us to sort of say, it should be a harmonious environment, so we don't want anything jumping out, jarring, doing something that's odd and weird in this scenario. So I don't want to be racist, though.
Well, harmony is a tough one. I agree. It's a little bit spongy, but and we have tried to be more concrete in the guidelines. So it's a tough thing to capture, I think. But it just occurred to me one quick comment. In the commercial guidelines, we do already have a language about openness of the bottom floor versus fewer openings on the upper floor. Remember that language? It's possible that we could actually add a little bit to that so that it is clear that the use, or that you're after a commercial look, which is what it says basically. It says, we want to, it's basically describing now, has always described a sort of open fenestration on the bottom. The two buildings I'm talking about that are back to back have residential scaled bottom floors. They have small openings. Some, I think, have almost no openings. I think the stone one has like just garage door and a front door that's solid. If you had a guideline, we do have a guideline commercially that basically says we need these bottom floors to be open. That, I've come to think of it, maybe that wasn't there when we were reviewing it, but that could be a way to help, because if you don't have the ability to have a bedroom on the bottom floor, then maybe you give up. Go ahead. Were you going to say something about that?
I'm sorry, to visualize exactly where you're talking about. Are you talking about where the on you? Oh, Naps. Okay, I kept thinking you guys were talking about, across the street. I was just trying to get.
Diagonal across from the Scout House, near Nap.
Okay. Yeah. No. I get it now. Absolutely. No. I hear what you're saying.
Let me chime in. So I think the guidelines are great, and that's fine to do, but really it's about the use. So if we want the bottom floor uses to always be commercial, we just say that in plain language. That's the zoning code part of it, and that's certainly much more enforceable than a design guideline. I think things like the openness and having a commercial appearance at the bottom, if it's forced to be a commercial space, it's probably going to have a commercial appearance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's sort of cart and horse issues. Is there anything else folks want to say about this topic? The mixed-use issue downtown. It seems like we have consensus on that. Oh, you know what I was going to ask is, let me pass it to you, Neil, in a second. But we do, since these items at the top of our list are less guideline-oriented, we should just reserve a moment to talk about how we're going to let our thoughts be known in some kind of more formal way to the council or the staff or both. So maybe a letter on that, on what we decide here. Neil.
Not a big comment here, but I know in the 2016 committee, we created a fictional block and lot. We actually had somebody that thought they could give us this. And we wanted to bring back the idea of the artist is working in the space where they're showing their art. And so where the artist would be on top and their studio would be down below, that this regenerates that idea of the live-at-home artist. Not that we can ever have that again, but just a thought.
Well, I'd like to have the look and feel of it anyway. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't want to lay out my whole thought process here, but just because you mentioned we have consensus, so I do have a different opinion about. I do think, I think that downtown living should be encouraged. I think we have plenty of commercial spaces, not that they should be taken away. And I also think that there are historic properties in town, and if it is the best, if there is only a private owner that can save that building, I would far prefer that than get the building, not be on the register or not, be kept as a historic building as it is. So
I'm not sure what you're saying, Marion. Could you clarify? Are you saying that you're afraid historic properties might be torn down?
No, I don't think that that's possible. But I think if they are empty forever because there's no commercial, it's commercially not viable, but it would be viable as a residence, then I think that is still preferred than it's being empty or getting dilapidated. Or we have a few of those that are in town empty forever, where if you might be able to do a home there, you could maybe rehab it easier. And, I know that property well, and I don't think it's done very well, the one next to Knapp that you were talking about, but the basic notion that it is residential in between these other commercial, I think is a nice mixture of things, and I am not bothered by that personally. So.
I actually agree with you on that. I think in our future, we don't know economically what's going to be happening. And rather than have a lot of empty spaces where there would have been commercial properties, I think it would be better to have somebody living in there than an empty space. And I think that may be happening in our future with Amazon and who knows what else is coming down the line. So I'd like to keep it a little more open to the possibility of all residential.
So now I'm starting to think this is entirely, if we're mixed on it, it would be entirely a guideline issue, you could argue, where Neil's vision of the older, live space just needs to, we have to maintain what we tried to do with those projects that are so fortress-like, we would have to require that the guidelines show the possibility of a commercial, treatment on the bottom, so that there's a studio option or a professional option or this gets talked about a lot in housing. Housing is the better economic engine for many neighborhoods than commercial. And it has a formula that in America has become a sure thing for lots of places. But there is a movement also afoot to make sure that if you want to preserve the option of commercial or mixed use, that you require this formatting of the building. This is designed to be flexible. So basically you say, you can of course live on the bottom if you like, but it has to appear to be a storefront.
Thank you. It occurred to me, yeah, I agree. It occurred to me maybe we could, like for the core downtown area, if there's such a thing, that we have the requirement that the downstairs be commercial, but in some of the outlying areas where it becomes more difficult for commercial properties to survive, that we would then make it more possible that people could use that for residential.
So the difference between CC and SC.
What's that?
Central commercial, service commercial, and residential.
Yeah.
That divide.
Yeah.
That's it.
They get less intense as you go out. Central commercial is the red strip down the middle when you see our zoning map.
Okay, so now I'm kind of persuaded that this is actually a guideline issue, perhaps first. So that's enlightening. Okay, let's move up to the next one, which is where and how to handle views, if at all. So this is something Doug raised somewhat recently and has been researching. I don't know, Doug, if you're prepared to say anything about it. Okay.
So this came up when we were reviewing the residential, and there were several references to views. A little history back from colonial times, views have not been an allowed item except for civil matters. There's been no regulatory responsibility or statutory rule. That changed in the mid-'80s in San Diego, when a project that had been approved at the bottom of the hill had a 5-story cap as to its size. And they planted eucalyptus and palm trees, which grew up and blocked the view of the development up on the hill, the Pacifica homeowners. Pacifica sued, and they prevailed because the court said there was no statutory or city ordinance that prohibited the blocking of views as being a right of the upside people. That's caused a rush of cities based on homeowners and homeowner associations wanting ordinances. Up and down the coast, Laguna Beach, Oceanside, Tiburon, Rancho Palos Verdes, all adopted ordinances to preserve views or to set up regulations to allow property owners to preserve their views. The next case was in the mid-'90s in Tiburon, where somebody had a view of the Golden Gate and of the bay, and his neighbor wouldn't trim his trees. The city had adopted an ordinance after the San Diego decision, and that went to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal upheld the right of the property owner that wanted the view. And they cited the 1954 Bourbon case out of the Supreme Court that said the city can be beautiful. There was a case out of Rancho Palos Verdes in the early 2000s, same sort of thing. Someone's view was being blocked, and the upside property owner wanted it trimmed. The man refused, went to the Court of Appeal, and the court said the city's ordinance allowed for trimming of trees to allow for views. All the ordinances say you can't build a structure to block a view. You have to leave some opening so there's a view. So it raises the question, do we want to do anything, or do we want to leave it basically a civil matter? Leave it between the two property owners. And if we do, then we ought to go back and look and make sure our language allows that.
Have struggled a lot with this, with house designs in Carmel. And I take the policy of going to the neighbors and say, we're going to be designing a new house here. And so here's my phone number. And you would get into arguments like, well, they bought a house that is closer to the water than you did. And so they paid more for that house because it's closer to the water than you are. They should have more view than you, because we should all have equal view. So you get into this discussion almost negotiating the views. Well, yeah, you don't want to have your view ruined, but we need to allow this person have a view too. And that's sort of a negotiated working with views I have found is very successful. And then when you go before the Planning Commission, all that business is done, you know. But I don't know if you can codify that, Doug, or if it's just something that you get recommended, or.
So currently it is codified in the city. We have codified language about views being protected, and in simple terms, it's basically you're not allowed to take the totality of someone's view away. If it's a certain quality of view, you know, think like whitewater views, things like that. There's discussion in the regulations about not being able to take it all away, and it is subjective, and that's why it goes to the Planning Commission. They look at pictures, they do site tours, they see how much of a view is being taken away, how much existed before. But it is codified right now. We do protect both views and privacy in our existing municipal code.
And Doug, can you imagine, we've done a lot of exercises around this table of like worst case scenarios. Do we have language to prevent a worst case scenario? Is there something, okay, you want to? Right, no, I'm asking Doug, do you have a vision of a worst case scenario legally or procedurally that our current treatment of this issue could lead to? Do you see what I'm asking? Like, what's the worst that could happen given what we have right now?
Brandon, a question for you on the existing. Is that for structures or is that for plants? So someone could build a structure that preserved a view but plant a bunch of trees that blocked the view. Yeah. So that would be a worst case scenario.
And that's actually, if you remember, we've had, over the last period of time we've been doing this, we had a local land use attorney, Jason Redderer, who came to one of these meetings and expressed his concern for just that our code currently doesn't regulate views being blocked by landscaping, either prospectively or, you know, if you plant it now, you can see, but it grows and it takes away the future. We have nothing either way. So that was something, it was a suggestion actually by him to include something like that in the zoning code update, that the views also pertain to current or future landscaping. So that's something we can explore if we want to.
Neil, sorry.
We all know designing homes in Carmel. Eventually the owner of your house says, Neil, could you go to the neighbor in front of us and tell him to trim the top of those trees? We can't quite see the ocean anymore. And so there's this back and forth with all the neighbors in front of you, and there ends up being these discussions. So I don't know how that plugs in, but happens a lot, and it has to do with the trees.
So Doug, you gave us a nice history of the controversy. Do you want to throw out food for thought on addressing some of this, or?
I just leave it to the property owners.
You just, mm-hmm.
Yeah. I called Mark Weiner because I knew Laguna had been to a contentious drafting of the ordinance, and he said he has one planner that spends full time on view issues. So I don't think we want to go that way.
I just want to agree that let's not regulate landscaping. Especially if we say we want to be a village in the forest, and then what of all the trees on public property? And we like tall trees and they grow up, and yeah, I wouldn't want to regulate that.
Melanie agrees.
So Doug, Melanie, and Marianne, are you guys saying also take out the existing regulation about structures? We're just talking about landscaping. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that did come up here in a community meeting. So this is a, I don't know, does anyone, so we've got, Neil is advocating, and that the system of talking to neighbors and trying to negotiate and basically having a design sensitivity to overlooking people's private yards and views of Whitewater, all that is working. But that the issue that was raised at a meeting a while back, that, you know, hey, these trees are a problem too, we're saying we want to stay out of that. Okay.
I actually think it encourages people talking to each other. You know, if it's all codified and regulated and everybody goes straight to the regulators and the lawyers, that it really discourages a dialogue between neighbors. So I think trees are a good thing.
Okay. Is that a hand up again, Neil? This is hand out?
Just a
Is
real
that different?
quick thought. I agree with Mary Ann on this, that it encourages discussion between the neighbors, and that is so important. I just encourage this among designers. When you're doing a house, bring in the neighbors day one, and you may have disagreements and so on, but you say at the end, we can iron those out in the planning commission, but let's do as much as we can between each other. And then it's just very quick and they're they're the neighbor of the person that you're designing for. You want them to be friends. Now that neighbor's going to say they were reasonable, as opposed to the neighbor saying they just totally ignored us, they didn't care about the sounds or anything, you know, and then they're the enemy.
Okay. I like the neighborliness. We still have some neighbors on the Zoom, but we're dwindling. But we're getting up to the top of this list here. You know, I did find in my notes, before we get totally to the top, because we're doing pretty well on time, I just wanted to, so you don't get the sense that we'll be done when we get to the very top. There were a couple things that should have been on here, like we had a quick discussion on faux building elements. I don't know if anyone remembers that. We've spent a lot of time on faux materials, and we've gotten some headway in that. But we had a brief and starred discussion of fake plastered windows on Sunset Center, fake shutters, fake doors that go nowhere, fake chimneys, you know, that we don't have a paragraph on. So maybe I'll insert that discussion right now. I think that we need to clarify that we're part of authenticity is not just the thing you make something out of, but then what you make out of it. So I think we should take a stab at something about false things that go nowhere, that are just devices, sort of fake devices for scaling. I guess it's consistent with that. We're trying not to do these little meaningless jogs and things, but people do that also with fake elements, like this thing I would love to climb up onto Sunset Center and remove. But any thoughts on that, on fake building elements? Should we take a stab at incorporating that, or am I just seeing nods around? Marianne?
That's a tough one, because, you know, we, for example, often use a fake chimney to hide. You know, we're trying to consolidate all these vents that you need in a house. Plumbing vents, dryer vents, vents for your hood, and all these stuff. And rather than having 15 things stick out randomly out of your roof, we often try to consolidate it and have it vent into and out of what looks like a chimney. And I think that that's a better solution than having all these random things sticking out of your roof. And then when it comes to fake shutters and fake windows, there is a long tradition in especially Mediterranean homes to actually have painted. You know, you go to any village in Italy, you know, you will find that everywhere to have either painted coins, cornerstones, you find painted windows on an empty wall. I mean, there is murals essentially, right? So there is, you know, that's always the problem with trying to regulate absolutely everything. You know, you want to consider the things where a fake building element may be actually a good advantageous.
I agree. It's a difficult thing, like even shutters. If you close the shutters often on a shuttered house, they wouldn't extend the full length of the window to really work. But I wouldn't want to see no shutters on certain styles of houses that works otherwise. I do abhor the fake windows in Sunset. There's no question that was terribly done. So it'd be nice to, I don't know how we can regulate without maybe using judgment at the time, the planning commission or DRB or whoever's doing it. I don't know how we'd word it to accept some things and not accept other things.
So I happen to be familiar with, as many architects are, the regulatory language for the now not so new, but it was built in my lifetime, town of Seaside in Florida, the Panhandle. That has a very strict building code that basically, and I don't think it was that difficult for them to phrase it, although I can go take a look, basically talks about functionality. So we've had that conversation already here for the commercial district, I think in particular about awnings and things like that, balconies, things that need to be in a way operational in order to, I would argue that consolidating vents into a chimney vent is the modern interpretation of venting through a chimney. I don't think that is faux. That is not fake. I would argue that murals are not what we're talking about here either. That's painting treatment. It's a grand tradition, I agree. What we're talking about is somebody doing the Sunset Center window. I mean, that is ludicrous.
Or the shutters,
Right.
this narrow
Right.
window that wide.
Right. Nobody wants to discourage shutters, especially if they're appropriate to the style. But when you have a teeny little line of shutters on either side of an enormous building, you are undermining the authenticity of your style. This is exactly what the Seaside Code addresses.
We should just bring that maybe to the next meeting. We studied it in school too. So that's a very, very good ordinance, and it might be something you could lift from that ordinance there.
All right, so I think it's, if people are agreed in general about the concept of the faux, I don't think it's as hard to regulate. Personally, I don't think it's as hard to regulate. The exceptions that people have brought up, I don't think would apply in the way that we would phrase it. Unless there are other exceptions that people are worried about that we haven't thought of. I think it is possible if people want to try to add that paragraph. I think it's in line with everything else we've said about authenticity and integrity. It's just not quite addressed.
Let me throw something out that I saw the other day. So I saw this the other day, and I'm curious how this would fit in. So you've got a house that's being constructed, new house, new construction, and the rafter tails don't naturally go out of the house underneath the eaves. But what they're doing is they're made out of wood, so they're like crafting nice, like sculpted rafter tails, like you would see a large, thick, 4-inch wide rafter tail coming out of a house, and it would be sculpted to have some. They're manufacturing those, and they're essentially nailing them underneath the eaves, so it looks like the rafter tail comes out. So where would that fall in this?
There was an architect at an earlier meeting, Eric, who advocated for that exact exception. It's a good question. I'm not sure. Again, shutters, we might not be saying, I think this is an analog, we might not be saying the shutter needs to be operational. We might be saying it needs to have the dimensions as if it were operational. This is the same thing we say about stonework. We're not asking you to build a building purely by a mason that's a solid stone wall, but it should look as though it has been built by a stonemason. So it's possible that that's how you get around that the functionality is, it has to have exactly the appearance as if it were functional. That's why the shutter cannot be an inch wide, because it would never be functional. If you decide to hinge it and have it cover the window for storms, that would be smart, but you don't have to. I mean, I think that would be the way around that. And, can you think of any other examples like that?
No,
Yeah, that's the main one. Does that make sense to people as a workaround? I mean, I think that's what we're saying. The
Well, rafter tails aren't functional. That's, I mean, the function, like, I get the chimney one. I get the chimney one because that's functional, but I'm just thinking like these applied things. And maybe we say no, but I think the issue there is that with modern construction, like, you don't have a 4-inch rafter tail naturally coming out of the way that it's built anymore. I mean, maybe it's like a glue lamb or something like that. It just doesn't come out. So you have to fabricate it to go with the style of the house. Maybe the answer is, sorry, get a big 4-inch wide, rafter for everyone, and then you have to sculpt it outside of the house. I don't know, but that's the question, because rafter tails aren't necessarily functional, but they are aesthetic.
They were functional when the buildings were built that way.
Right.
But now we have a tighter envelope, is what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Let's see what yes, that's a problem. I just thought of another example. Tudoresque looking place where the timbers may be very well done, look older, attractive, but aren't really supporting the house. But they're part of that look. That would, we don't want to eliminate those kinds of issues, those kinds of designs. So.
Yeah, I think we're talking about authenticity. And so I think if, something is brought before the design review board or the planning commission, and it looks like it's going to be an authentic appearance for the type of home and the materials being used, then I think it'll look good in the neighborhood.
My opinion is that from what I've seen in the thing so far, we already have the concepts touching on other elements of the building, and what we just are missing is, it's like a middle scale. We have the materials have to be authentic or treated as though they appear authentic, and then we have the building in general needs to, and there's that middle scale of the kind of building element, a window, a door, whatever, and I just think that's the only thing that's missing. I think we can probably come up with a phrasing that does not require people to go back to ancient building techniques, as long as you're actually accurately reproducing the appearance of that. I think that's what we've been asking, that the stone cannot look like wallpaper, because that's not how it used to be used. So I think it sounds like we should take a stab at it and
Look authentic.
Yeah. Okay, and then the other one, this is going to feel like we're jumping around, I'm sorry, but again, I think we have time. I had a starred thing that didn't make it to the list, courtyard access and dimensions. This has to go, this is the commercial design guideline for a moment. We thought we didn't have it right, or it wasn't enough, is what I remember. The way that we had addressed courtyard, we have some, I think it was sort of a vaguer type of language, make sure it's not too much opening if it's this kind of courtyard or that kind of passage, but don't make it to be too big or small. So I think we just wanted to talk about, and while other people are reacting, I'm going to try to find the spot. Oh no, here it is. 3.3.0 in commercial, provide outdoor spaces to enrich the interplay between indoor and outdoor activities. Underneath that, for a forecourt, maintain the street wall by limiting the proportion of the opening to 30% or less. We had a question of whether those were the right numbers. In 3.4.2, limit for an interior court, limit the entrance to a minor break in the street wall. Well, that's different than 30%. It's a little bit more less. It's more vague. For the intra-block walkway, mixed-use properties are 3 or more lots of 75 feet. The width. Oh wait, this is sorry. She indirectly. Where are we? Gates. Oh no, we wanted to talk about Gates density bonus and zoning code. So there was a lot about this transition between the sidewalk and these interior spaces that we felt was either inconsistent or too strict or not strict enough. So I just wanted to draw our attention to this larger issue here, which we did table. So we talked about the density bonus, that is permissible and whether that's being abused. Doug?
Are we leaving this, 3.4.1?
I just have it all starred, 3.4.1 through 3.4.3, those first three, I have starred as being somewhat being treated differently and not consistently and not quite figured out.
Like I had some notes from there, think about some of the projects that we've seen recently, like Ulrika Plaza, when we're redoing these, also having a floor, like a minimum for the opening space. How do we treat gates with interblock walkways? Expectation for 24/7 access. So I think this is one of those situations where, correct me if I'm wrong, what the plan is, Victoria and I will sit down after we're done with the deeper discussions and do a push through with our copious notes.
Yes.
and try to see if we captured everything and then do another review.
Right. But I don't know if anybody wants to, I don't know to what, it's been a while now, how much we did table this, but yes, it needs another thought process, and maybe, Brandon, you're the one with the most experience to sort of see what these issues have been. Obviously, you're the one with the most experience, but to just sort of tell us about what's come up. But does anyone have any kind of final comments, not final, but just to inform a revision of this or a review of these three elements, the forecourt, the interior courtyard, and the intra-block walkway? Anything we should all be paying attention to while we take another stab at this?
Well, on 341, opening of 30% or